My name is Nitzan Mager. I'm the creator of the series Quarantine, I Love You. I want to say a special thank you to Shocker Studios and Justin, who's here, for the generous funding that has helped make season 2 a possibility. So I'll start off just a little bit about myself and how the series got started. I am a filmmaker living in Brooklyn, New York, and I have kind of had a journey where I started off acting and then kind of pivoted more towards screenwriting and directing. And at the beginning of quarantine, I had a few feature screenplays that I was working on, and one that was kind of advancing in some exciting ways. And there was a reading scheduled in Manhattan for April, but of course, none of that came to pass. And there were big life changes and industry changes for everybody. And one of them was also that this summer was supposed to be the kickoff for a screenwriting lab called Mothership Screenwriting Lab that was going to be based in Wichita. And it was a screenwriting lab for women or people, female identifying people who also have caregiving duties, whether it's childcare or caring for other family members or elderly parents. And the idea that was that we were going to help subsidize and offset that cost, because that can often be a hurdle for women when they're trying to enter any field, but especially in filmmaking. But that also got put on pause. And so myself and Leela O'Connor from mama.film started to kind of brainstorm ways that everything could pivot. So for me, my screenwriting work and the lab that we had envisioned together. And out of that was born Quarantine, I Love You, which is just a series of short conversations that take place just like you and I are here now on Zoom. And the idea was to have really personal interactions between people who are close to one another, but also to be able to speak to whatever was happening in the world around us, which of course a lot has been happening and was happening from the beginning and still is now. So I started to just write these short little scenes, and I was casting actors who I knew who were usually on Broadway or in television shows or in films, and were also stuck at home just like we all were. And we just started to record these short little films and to post them online. And that ended up kind of becoming our first season of the show. And then we were so fortunate to get funding to be able to create this second season. And the idea for this season specifically was that it would be leading up week by week to the election. So that the idea was that there would be 8 episodes, just like in the first season, with 5 leading up to election day, and then 3 more episodes that would kind of deal with whatever the aftermath of the election is, which is a big surprise still to all of us, what will happen. So we decided to kind of have a workshop or this meeting to give a behind the scenes taste of what goes into making Quarantine, I Love You, what goes into making a Zoom film. And so as I was planning this workshop and thinking about what it would entail, I was suddenly struck by the fact that it's kind of crazy to do behind the scenes of how to make a Zoom film, because mostly a lot of what it entails is what we're all doing right here, right now. And you don't necessarily need to be a filmmaker on the technical side of things to be able to make it. And usually, if you've ever been to a film set or seen a film set, there's certainly a lot of them around us all the time in New York City, but there's just like hundreds of people milling about. And I mean, it's just an enormous crew and so many things, so many people, so much equipment. And it's not only something that's enormously expensive, but it also requires lots of people with very deep knowledge of a lot of technical matters, and this does not. So so then I was like, well, what were we thinking? What are we going to do in a behind the scenes of making a Zoom film? Because actually I'm sitting right now where all the magic takes place, and it is actually my basement. Making this whole series in a laundry room. But then my next thought was like, wow, that's actually amazing, because what this means is that anybody can make a film, and that the building blocks of a really great Zoom film are not extensive knowledge in all of the craft of filmmaking, but it's more a really good grasp of a subject matter that you're passionate about, and and an understanding of what makes for really great dialogue between characters. So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about, and I'll also have a fun writing exercise for you to do. So specifically for season 2 of Quarantine I Love You, which is the election themed season, the way that it works is that week by week, I am making a new episode. And generally I've been recording an episode on a Thursday, editing it Friday, Saturday, and then maybe coming back to it on Monday, and it gets released on a Tuesday. So that's a really fast turnaround generally from filming to editing to releasing. But what that does is it makes it possible for us to do what we set out to do, which is to really speak to the moment. But even that turned out to not be enough time for the episode that we just released today, episode 2 of this season. What happened is that we filmed the episode on the Thursday, and on Friday, as we all know, we found out that President Trump had COVID. And he, because obviously this is an election themed season, he was discussed in the episode. It was part of the storyline, and it was impossible to not have that be present in the story. And so I had to go back, rewrite the script over the weekend, send it back to Dennis and Sarah, the actors. And we reshot it on Monday, yesterday. And I edited yesterday and today in order to release it this afternoon. So it's kind of funny because it ends up being a little bit more like a Saturday Night Live type of turnaround. And that might happen again as we go on, because I feel like as we're getting closer to the election, things keep getting crazier, and things are just popping up at the last minute, which is really exciting. And again, I think because of the relative ease of making things via Zoom, it does make it possible to respond to the moment and in the moment. So because this season obviously goes into quite political issues, which are sometimes hard to talk about, one of the tactics that I've used as a writer is to take whatever like stereotypical ways people approach these issues or talk about these issues, the ways that they're portrayed in the media, and sort of twist them around, because sometimes looking at things from a different perspective makes it easier to talk about it in a way that's fresh and entertaining, obviously, and hopefully can spark conversation. So the idea with this first episode was to kind of flip the script on what traditionally would be like the more conservative role in the family, which would be, you know, the parent, the older person, and the more rebellious younger person would tend to the liberal side. And the idea was that in order to approach the issues that are discussed, like reproductive rights and political leanings in the episode, that by flipping it, it makes the audience able to engage with these subjects in a totally different way. And it's surprising, and it's hard to be surprising, I think, when it comes to these issues, because everyone is very kind of set in their ways. So this tactic of kind of using an unexpected casting of who takes which side was a way to make this issue accessible and to make it something that people would want to engage with. And yes, I think that there's a liberal bent to the episode as a whole and the series as a whole to some degree, but one of the main goals that we had from the get-go was to make something that didn't just pit one side against the other, which is obviously something that's become really prevalent in the media and in the news, and in politics in general. But the idea was, well, A, to kind of leave no one completely unscathed. We kind of take shots at both sides and no one is totally safe, but also we try to make both sides human, because it is really about being able to find a way to have dialogue about these important issues and not just be totally polarized. So a quick kind of like overview of how the process works for putting together the series. Is that I create a skeleton idea for a situation for an episode. And as I mentioned, I try to flip the tropes upside down and play around with that. So that's kind of the idea that I have. And I write the script, and then I get into the casting. So as you noticed with this second episode and also the first episode, these are some tremendous, amazing actors. And Sarah Steele, who plays Junior, I happen to know. But for Ali Wentworth and for Dennis O'Hare, I did go through a casting director, who's also a friend of mine. And we made offers to their agents. So I have to think of different possible actors who could be right for the role, offer them the role. And then if they say yes, then I rewrite the script that I already had to suit them perfectly and specifically. And then I meet them on Zoom. We do a rehearsal that kind of naturally leads into a finished product. We run the scene several times. I give them notes in between takes. I kind of hide my view so they don't see me. It's just the two of them side by side, exactly like you see them in the episode, and they just see one another. So I think there's a natural realism to the way that we film it that's actually kind of pretty rare on film, because usually you're on a set, you're surrounded by tons of crew members, lights, everything. You're not in a real home. Usually you're on some sort of set. But in this case, the actors are in their real homes. They're connecting with one another in the way that we're all connecting with one another these days on Zoom. And there's a certain intimacy to this type of interaction and a familiarity to it, so that when the actors are doing the scene, there's no one else there, right? There's no crew members, there's nothing. It's just them talking to one another in a way that they would really talk to their family members or close friends. So I think that actually makes my work as a director much easier, because I'm kind of there, but I'm also invisible. So I'll turn on my sound to kind of just give them little notes in between scenes, but they're really in it with each other. And I think that makes it a really wonderful experience for them. And I think it makes the scenes much stronger too. So after we have the rehearsal and we shoot several takes of it, then it's my role to start the editing process. So I look through all the different takes that we have. I kind of pick the best one, but then there's still a lot of editing involved, because I'm pulling different parts from different episodes, from different versions of the episode, and splicing them together. And if you go through the episode when you watch it, when it's complete, you can kind of maybe find the little moments where there are cuts. We're not working with multiple angles as we usually would in a regular film. You would have a close-up, you would have a wide shot, you would have a shot on, a close-up on just one of the character and then the reverse on another character. So that's how film editing usually works. And the reason it feels so seamless is because there's never a jump in the frame. You're just going from one angle to another angle, and it all feels just very organic. But in the case of the Zoom film, we're only seeing things from one angle the entire time, and the two different close-ups of the two characters are happening simultaneously, so you can't even really cut from one to the other. So that's the tricky part of the editing, and it does mean that it takes quite a long time, or at least longer than one would imagine that it would, to just do such a simple film. But then, of course, as I mentioned, sometimes we need to rewrite and reshoot when things are changing in the news. So with episode 1, you may have noticed there's the reference to Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing. That actually happened right before we filmed. So I did a quick rewrite, sent it to the actors, and we filmed with that already in the script. But in the second episode, as I mentioned, we had to reshoot the whole thing yesterday. So then once we have the finished edited product, I add the titles and the theme song. So I see someone asked about the editing. I edit on Premiere, actually. So I just import the QuickTime, which Zoom will record for you when you record the Zoom conversation. I import the QuickTime of that into Premiere, and then I split it up into the different takes. And actually for this episode, I did have to get a little bit fancier than I've done before, which was I did end up isolating performances between Dennis and Sarah for a portion of the episode. So that is possible. It's just a little bit more complicated to do that, but you can do it on Premiere by just using 50% of the frame on either end and then overlapping it on the timeline. And then you can isolate the performances and put performances together that weren't in the original take together. So that's it, essentially. That's how an episode is made. And it's both very complicated in that I am doing everything myself. And usually, of course, you see a movie or a TV show, even a web series, there will be credits rolling and all of the people who contributed to making it happen. The editors, the sound editors, the directors, screenwriters, composers, actors, but also the PAs, the cinematographers, yes, there's a whole list of like very basic, minimal people who are involved in making even a simple video or film. But in this case, besides the actors, it was just me on the technical side. Of course, I'm very lucky to have the support of our executive producers and our sponsors. But in terms of the physical task of making the episode, it's a one-woman show. So in that sense, it's very complicated. But on the flip side of that, it's very simple in that I am able to do all of this by myself. So it's not easy, especially not on a very tight turnaround timeline, doing it week after week, but it is doable, which is, again, one of the things that's really exciting about making a Zoom film or a Zoom series is that you can do it yourself. You have all of the tools. Even if you don't have Premiere, which is kind of a more professional editing software, there's lots of more basic editing softwares out there that you can also use. So I think that actually is kind of a serendipitous thing for me to start making these Zoom films, because in quarantine, I mean, not only was it really hard to get on a film set. They're slowly starting to reopen, but it's very complicated with a lot of restrictions and a large budget. Some of the actors who were in season 1 are now back filming on their shows, and I see the pictures that they post. Each one of them has their own little plastic pod with zippers, and everyone is masked, and you need to have a COVID compliance officer for SAG and for all the unions. So it is possible. People are slowly coming back to production, but it's costly and time consuming and very complex. But I feel like the discovery of this medium has really been a boon for me as a storyteller, and potentially I feel like it could be for other storytellers as well, because it's a very storyteller friendly medium. It really strips storytelling down to its basics, which is the actors, and then the script, so the writing, which is something that's accessible to all of us. So that's one of the things that made it really exciting for me when I realized that, and then also had this idea to teach a course in making the Zoom film. So I'm teaching a full semester course workshop at WSU at Shocker Studios, of which Justin is the head. And we've had several classes so far, and it's been really wonderful. So the idea is that the students are going to make their own Zoom film, and I'm kind of guiding them through the process. And the first component of that is writing a great script. And the second component is working with actors. So the process that we've had so far in the screenwriting component is coming up with a log line. And a log line is just a 1-sentence description of what happens in a film. And it's super, super helpful to have as a writer, even before you start writing your script, because it forces you to distill down to the very basics, exactly what the scene is about. So you have the protagonist, whoever they are, you describe who they are briefly in a few words, and they're dealing with X situation. And if they don't deal with it, if there is no resolution, then Y will happen. So you have the protagonist, you have the conflict, and then you have the element of the stakes, because there always needs to be stakes. Even if it's a Zoom film, you need to have stakes, and you need to have a clear want for your protagonist. So once we did log lines and we had the students pitch their log lines, I had students write a scene with no dialogue. And the idea behind this is that you write a scene that has two components, or you write a screenplay, a short screenplay that has two components. You have a scene that shows the before of an event, and you have a scene that shows the after of the event. And this is just with one character. It could possibly be with more characters, but they are not able to talk to one another. And it's just about seeing their actions, preparing for an event, and then returning from the event. And just based on the way that it's written with a description of the action, the location, and the costume, the audience should be able to understand what took place in the middle. So we don't show that scene of the event, we just show what happened before with a character preparing for the event, and what happened after with a character returning from the event. And this is super helpful for a Zoom scene, because you're going to be in a house, you're going to have a character in front of the computer. You're not going to be able to show a crazy scene, but you can show something that happened right before a big crazy scene, and you can show something that happened right after a big crazy event. And that should be able to tell the story without actually showing it. And then the second exercise that we're doing is to write a scene that's essentially just dialogue. And the prompt for these specific scenes was to have two characters, And one of the characters has a secret and the other needs to find out what the secret is. And that's the whole scene. And so what we've been doing in this course is giving students the building blocks that they need to make a successful Zoom film. So as I've said, it's all in the writing. These Zoom scenes are really dialogue heavy. And so it's important to keep in mind what makes dialogue really great. And one is that it really pops off the page and it is very specific to the characters. And two is that it's not on the nose, meaning that characters aren't ever saying exactly what they're thinking or feeling. They're kind of coming around to it. So I'm going to give you guys a really simple exercise. And I thought that we would have time to do it during the workshop, but I'm not sure we will because I'd love to leave time for questions. So if everybody can take a moment to get just a piece of paper to write on and a pen, or if you're sitting at your computer and you can type, you can do that. And I'm just going to give you a quick little exercise that can be used as a way to just jumpstart writing your own Zoom film. So I'm going to ask you to write 4 things. So number 1, write down a type of vegetable. Number 2, write down a person's name. Number 3, write down a type of relationship. So husband, wife, brother, sister, best friends. And number 4, write down a social issue that you are personally passionate about. And now that you have those 4 things, number 1, the vegetable, that's going to be the subject of conversation that your characters are talking about. And number 4, the social issue that you're personally passionate about, that's going to be what the conversation is really about. So that's your subtext. Number 2, the person's name, that's going to be your protagonist. And number 3, that's the type of relationship. So your second character will be whatever the second person in the relationship is. So husband, wife, or brother, sister, or 2 friends. And so a great starting point is just to take this prompt and start writing down a few lines of conversation and see where it takes you. Because yes, and you can please share if you would like in the chat, if you would like to share what you wrote down unwittingly for your prompts, you can please share. All right, so since we just have 15 minutes left, rather than make you write in this moment, I'll leave it for you guys to do after the course, but you can feel free to get in touch if you would like to share the first few pages of what you come up with. I would love to read it. But right now, if anyone has any questions about, can be like the technical questions, like the editing program things, or questions about, actually, I see there's already a few questions here in the chat. So I'll start with answering them. And if you have more questions, you can add them to the chat. So is it ever difficult to put your own political leanings aside and write for another side, whatever that may be? So that's a great question. And I feel like for me, my acting training was actually really instrumental in being able to do that, because as an actor, you're oftentimes asked to play someone with a point of view that is very different from your own. And the idea is not only to be able to portray that totally opposite point of view from yours, but you have to find your in to that. You have to find out what parts of it do resonate for you so that you can be believable. Because I think with very few exceptions, most people are not bad people, even if they think in a way that's really antithetical to the way that you think. You can probably follow some sort of logic or get at the heart of why it is that they believe what they believe, why it is that they do what they do. And even good people can do things that you disagree with. And it's not about condoning everything that everybody does, but it's about trying to understand what's behind it. So, yeah. The contract that we use for the union actors, they are all SAG actors. So I did have to go through SAG and get SAG approval for the project. If we were filming in person, or even if I was just sending them equipment, because the way that some people are filming now is that they're sending equipment packages to the actors. And then you have to start jumping through all these hoops to make sure that everything is sanitized. So even if they're not coming onto a set, there are a lot of boxes to tick. But in the case of this project, because the actors are using their own equipment, just their computer, and they are staying at home, there's no travel required or any sort of interaction, then it wasn't very hard to get the approval relatively. There's still a ton of paperwork. It's always kind of a headache dealing with SAG. But we got the project approval. And yes, and that was necessary for working with these actors who are SAG. Curious if storytellers going forward will work this new world into their scripts. Will characters social distance, wear masks? I mean, I think that it's really hard to tell how long this will last, because I don't think there's going to be one cutoff for the situation that we're in. So it might be just a slow fade on that. And so I think there's a good chance it'll be relevant for a while. Tools and techniques used in Premiere to smooth the jump cuts. Yes. At first, I did try to implement some different effects in Premiere, like a pixelated screen or something that'll make it look like. But I realized that that is actually quite distracting, and that in a Zoom call or any sort of video chat call, a lot of times there will be just jumps that are happening in just the regular usage of it. And so I kind of built that into the world, that this is a conversation on Zoom. So jumps sometimes do happen. But some of the tips that I can say that have been helpful, which are tips that are often used in regular editing, is to cut on action. So if someone is moving their hand, to do the cut as they're moving the hand, to do the cut as they're moving in or out. When people are moving in the frame, it's much less noticeable. If someone is just still, and then I cut to them being here, then it's a much more noticeable cut. But if they're here and then they're doing something with their hands and I cut on the hand motion, again, that makes it better. Same thing with the sound. If you cut and do an L cut with the sound, so that the sound is not being cut at the same time as the image, that also helps to smooth it, because it's just less jarring. The audience is following the smoothness of the audio track, and so the visual image is less noticeable. So cutting on action is one tip, and then not cutting action and audio at the exact same place is also helpful. Aside from getting name talent, benefits of doing it through SAG, none. There's no benefits of working through SAG just to get those name talents. That's the only benefit and the only reason to do it. The payment for them, this is ultra low budget web series. The minimum is $125 a day plus 10% for their agents if you go through their agents. I did, when we made the offers to the actors through their agents, we said that that was going to be the payment, but we did leave the door open if they wanted to negotiate a higher rate. But honestly, it's a very short time commitment for them. It's an hour and a half of their time. It's not a full day of shooting. They have no transportation that they need to take. And they're all actors who are used to getting paid much, much, much more than that. But they're also actors who are used to working much, much more than they are now. So they're quite pleased to have these opportunities to act. They did read the script, of course, before taking the role and were interested in the opportunity to play these particular characters in these particular scripts. So none of them are doing it for the money. The idea of a soundtrack. Yeah, I decided not to use a soundtrack. I played with it, but it felt very kind of contrived for me because these are very short scenes, and the idea is for the audience to be able to feel like they're eavesdropping on a conversation that's happening on Zoom. So I tried not to make it feel too produced, but we do have our own Quarantine I Love You theme song, which a good friend of mine who's a singer, songwriter based in Brooklyn, wrote for us and recorded for us. With the Zoom platform attempting color correction, I try to avoid it if I can, but in this second episode, I did have to do color correction on Sarah's image because it seemed fine at first when we were recording, but then every time she got too close, the angle that she had with the camera just made her face too dark. So we brightened it, did a little bit of color correction, and also sharpened her image. So it doesn't look great. I mean, it's not a cinematic medium, and the image quality isn't very high. But again, because you're establishing that this is actually just a Zoom call, a video chat call, you can kind of get away from having not great images. Yes, Zoom is naturally jumpy. Will the industry have to catch up to the immediacy, real-timeness of this kind of storytelling? 24-hour news cycle. Storylines expire quickly. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I've been struggling with is like, I'm not the Daily Show. I'm not, the Tonight Show. I'm not a show that's about kind of rehashing the news on a daily basis. It's really first and foremost about people and about their relationships and their intimate relationships and interactions. And it's set against a backdrop of news that's constantly shifting. So I have to keep news in there. It's in the story. I have to take it into account as I'm writing. But I think that by not having that be the main part of the story, so for example, with the reshoot that we did for this second episode with Dennis and Sarah, the rewrites were pretty minimal because at the end of the day, it's about a young woman who's really not sure she's ready to be a mom, and she's trying to tell her dad about it, and he's just totally on a different page, and it takes her up until the very end of their conversation to try to say what she really wants to say. But that's really the subtext of the scene, even though there's all of this political and news stuff over the top of it. So what I'm hoping is that this series and that this season specifically won't expire per se, because it'll actually feel like a real story that's a real human, relatable little snippet of life during these times, and that still feels relevant and relatable, even when the news has already continued onwards. All right, so I think those are all the questions so far, unless anyone wants to ask one last question before we close out. I'm going to put my email in the chat here. If you feel inspired, going to do that to everyone this time. And if you feel inspired to share a few pages of something that you write based on the prompt, I would love to hear it, or you can just send me what you wrote down for your prompt. How did I rewrite scripts for the actors like Allie? Cost involved in posting the series on YouTube. Rewriting the scripts for the actors. Well, with Allie, for example, I knew that she personally really had COVID. And so I wrote that into the script just because I felt like it's something that would be relatable for her to play, and that it was interesting having kind of life be a reflection of art. There's no cost in posting or hosting the series on YouTube unless you want to pay YouTube for ads to promote it. But otherwise it's free and great. It's very user-friendly, as opposed to Facebook, where we've also been posting the episodes, not so user-friendly at all. But it's a great way for people to share things. So that's why we're also posting it on YouTube. YouTube also promotes things that are posted natively on their video service, as opposed to if you just share a YouTube video on Facebook, they don't promote it as much because it's money for them. All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us. I hope that this is inspiring for you to either watch the series or to make your own series, or even just one film. I think it's a great opportunity, as I said, for storytellers to seize on this opportunity and use a very relatively easy, relatively cheap, and relatively user-friendly medium to tell your stories. So be in touch, and I hope to hear from you, either with questions about Quarantine I Love You or with you sharing your own work.